Back when I first got into collecting vintage computers, it was fairly common to find machines for reasonable prices. 20 years ago, it was very common to find machines at flea markets and general places like that for maybe, at most, 5 or 10 bucks, sometimes 20 maybe. And even moving forward to like 2018 when I first started to get into collecting computers, it was fairly common to even see machines selling in the $50 to $100 range for rarer systems, maybe sometimes in the few hundred range. However, fast forward to the year 2020 and you can see an astronomical growth in price in some of these vintage computers. Machines such as Apple machines, Tandy, Commodore, even IBM and PC compatible machines skyrocketed in price this past year and moved forward even to 2021, and there's still an amazing increase in price even between these past year. Now, in order to sort of show just how much the vintage computing market has sort of blown up in prices recently, one of my favorite channels, Oz Retro Comp, does these sort of monthly videos in which he goes into sort of the Australian retro computing market and sort of the prices of different machines during a given time. And of course, take these results with a grain of salt, because this obviously there's a lot of room for error here. However, I feel like this gives sort of a pretty accurate depiction of sort of what's going on with the marketplace as far as vintage computers go. Taking a look at one of the more common machines, the Macintosh Plus, you can see that during April of 2020, the average resale price for these averaged out between both broken and working units was about $135.49, which isn't too bad, especially for a complete system. However, just move that up to July, and the price is already up to $177.43, which is about a 30% increase from what it was in April. Now, of course, it could have gone back down since then, but you can definitely see that the prices are increasing in most of these vintage computers, and the same sort of trend is definitely applied to other machines throughout this past year or two. So what is it that's causing vintage computers to rise in price so much? Well, in today's video, I hope to sort of explain sort of why this is happening. Now, technically, there is no solid answer to this question. There's many different reasons that could be responsible for this. However, I hope to sort of shed a bit of light as to some of the things that are sort of causing the prices of vintage computers to rise so significantly in these past few years and months. So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and get right into this video. So before we actually get into this video, the first thing I sort of want to explain is sort of how collecting works. Now, in order to understand this, I'm going to show you this simple graph here. Now, this might look a little bit crude at first, but this sort of represents the life cycle that a particular object goes through, and of course this can differ depending on what type of object that is in particular, but for a tech object, like let's say for example an iPhone, the graph is going to look somewhat like this, and it's sort of going to be measuring the price of a particular item over a period of time. And at first, as you can see here, this is the original price of the iPhone when it was first released by Apple. However, over time, as the device ages, it reaches a point where it's basically worthless and everybody throws them away, and it's basically obsolete and nobody wants it. However, the interesting pattern you'll see here is as the device ages even more, the price rises again to the point where it starts becoming collectible. Now, of course, the rate at which this happens, or if it happens at all, depends on the product's history and whether it's significant in any way or the company behind it. But typically, the pattern will look something like this for an Apple product, for example, or other well-known and significant companies like Apple or Commodore or anything like that. Is going to be something like this. And if you take a look, this is sort of where it all sort of ties in to the actual situation that's been going on with the vintage Mac collecting community, where at one point you could find machines for dirt cheap at like a garage sale or something like that, whereas today you really have to do a lot of hunting to find anything for a reasonable price. However, there is more reasons to the rapid growth of Mac prices or in vintage computer prices period than just collectability. As, I don't feel like just a normal collectability would drive prices of even common machines up this much, and let me get into why I think this is. As a matter of fact, vintage Apple prices aren't the only thing that's growing. The company itself has grown a lot recently. As a matter of fact, over the past few years, Apple has grown rapidly to become the world's first trillion-dollar company in August of 2018. And this, along with the rich history of the company itself, is not only going to provide more exposure for them, but it also is going to lead more people to become interested and want to buy a vintage Mac or vintage Apple machine of some variety. And what you might be thinking is, well, that only covers the Apple spectrum of the vintage computing realm. What about other companies such as Commodore or Atari or stuff like that? Well, I feel like what happens here is once people sort of become aware of Apple's history and the Macintosh, a lot of them go on to learn about other vintage computer manufacturers and get interested in those other vintage computer manufacturers such as Commodore or Tandy or IBM or anything like that, and therefore spread the interest in vintage computers even farther. And for anybody who's sort of scratching their heads wondering why Apple could lead to anybody becoming interested in vintage computers, well, I'd like to mention that this is how a lot of my personal friends who collect vintage computers and vintage Macs, and including myself, have sort of gotten into this partially. I know several people, including myself, as well as people like Arno, the iApple guy, have all sort of gotten into Macs by sort of discovering Apple history and stuff like that, and then finding it interesting. And that led to us not only getting into vintage Macs, but also other vintage computers. And it sort of definitely, I feel like, is responsible partially for driving the prices up, at least on Apple products alone. And I feel like there's a few other things, too, that could be responsible for this. And one of those is definitely the YouTube exposure. Over the past year or so, I feel like the vintage computing YouTube scene has definitely exploded a lot, with a lot of already well-established channels ballooning to extreme amounts of subscribers, and also other channels starting out and growing a lot in this past year or so. And I feel like this is definitely one of the things that is not definitely helping increase exposure for vintage computing collecting, and therefore causing the prices to go up. No, of course, when I say this, I'm not asking you to unsubscribe from all your favorite retro computing YouTube channels. That would be terrible for me and everybody else, but I do feel like that with all this new YouTube popularity, that's definitely sort of one of the things that's leading to the rapid growth in prices with all these old computers and stuff like that. However, I feel like if you look at all these different things, both the collectibility aspect of it, the Apple history stuff, and expanding sort of into other vintage computer areas, and just the whole YouTube thing, it's bringing a lot of new people into the vintage computing scene. And I feel like the main cause that's causing mainly eBay prices to go through the roof is the fact that these eBay sellers the fact that the eBay sellers themselves are sort of trying to make a small profit off of this. Essentially, how this works is the eBay sellers are specifically taking advantage of the collectibility, growing popularity, and newcomers to the vintage computing scene, as well as the increasing value of these vintage machines, to sort of create misleading advertising and scam people into paying a lot more for machines that are not worth as much as they're advertised to be. And the sad thing is it's more likely the newcomers that they're trying to target, as those are mainly the people who are going to fall for things like $349 Macintosh Classics, for example. I mean, no offense to any newcomers, we were all there at some point, but I feel like that's sort of their dedicated target market here as far as these sort of scam things. But this is definitely one of the main reasons, obviously, that it's causing vintage computers like these to be so hard to find for cheap, is that everybody sort of wants to make some money off of them. And one of the final reasons I want to mention, too, is the nostalgia bubble effect, sort of. Basically, a lot of people are sort of getting back into these older computers they grew up with, and sort of remember from their childhood, and I think, too, that's allowing or causing people to want to charge more on some of these machines, because they know that people are actively looking for them to get their hands on. And I feel like that's sort of the reason why we're starting to see a lot of early 2000s and late 90s machines being priced really high, whereas they didn't used to be. And I think it's mainly because a lot of those people are probably trying to get back into their sort of childhood computing platforms, and I feel like that's sort of the reason for a lot of late 90s DOS PCs and Windows 98 PCs and stuff like that, as well as some of the old Macs from that time period to become so pricey as well, whereas they used to not be worth that much. So, those are some of the common reasons that I personally believe and think are responsible for the rapid increasing in prices regarding these vintage Mac machines and other vintage computers and stuff like that. And the main reason I wanted to make this video was because I've heard a lot of people sort of complaining over these past few years about sort of how much the prices are going up, and I don't really feel like there's any other videos out there sort of explaining exactly why this might possibly be happening, so I figured I'd try to make that video. But the other reason I wanted to make this video is to talk about how we could possibly stop this trend from continuing on with these rapid increases in price. And one of the reasons is to spread the knowledge around about these people who are trying to make unnecessary amounts of money off of eBay and places like that. And it's not just eBay. I mean, don't take it as the eBay is a bad place to buy Macs. It's a great place to buy Macs, but there's other places too that this happens. But just try to spread awareness in general that there are people that are sort of trying to make unnecessary amounts of money off these old machines, and also try to educate people about sort of how much these machines are actually worth. I mean, I know that there's a lot of people out there who do believe that these Macintosh Classics, for example, are worth as much as they are. And they're not worthless, but they definitely aren't worth as much as everybody seems to be charging for them. And, of course, to be real, I mean, these Macs are going to go up in value. That's just how the whole collectible aspect of it works. But I feel like they shouldn't be going up this quickly, and if we try to do the best we can to eliminate the sort of, and it's a hard thing to do, but sort of try the best we can to reduce the amount of people who are falling for these people that are trying to upsell them on vintage Mac stuff, that we can at least slow the rate at which these Macs accelerate in price, it seems, or at least try to reduce it down a little bit. But anyway, that said, I hope this video answered some of your guys' questions if you had any relating to this topic, and also sort of explained a bit about how this sort of why this is happening. And also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and like this video to let me know I'm doing a good job. Subscribing definitely helps me out a lot when making these videos, and I really appreciate it. If all you guys who aren't already subscribed would be sure to subscribe. The channel's been growing a lot recently, and I have a lot planned for this next upcoming year. So, that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and yes, I am recovering from the hard drive incident. I did lose a bit of stuff, but we should be getting back on a normal upload schedule soon, as of now. But with that said, thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you guys all next time.